very excited about. Thank you, Haley. We are so excited to be with you today. If you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard me say, I could talk about recruiting all day, but I will try not to. So we're going to keep it moving, keep it going. I'm so excited to see all of you here. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and hop in the chat and tell us where you are joining from. Good morning, Chaim. I'm so happy to see you. One of my good friends. Kevin, we love the home care ops team as well. We're always so excited to see you guys. I see people from the Careworks team. We have Illinois. I used to live in Illinois, actually. I could say that about a lot of places, though. Dallas, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, Maine, Virginia, Galax, Virginia. Now, hold on, because I got a speeding ticket there when I was 18. It's a very small town. And so anytime I see that, I'm like, oh, that's where it happened. Galax, Virginia. Elder care at home. We love working with you guys. This is so fun to see everybody joining in. Welcome, Carlos from El Paso. We are so excited for the great partnership with you guys. So many amazing places, and it is fun as a military brat to scroll through and go, well, I've lived there. Well, I've lived there. Well, I've lived there. Connecticut in the house. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to have you here. We have a lot of great stuff to go over today. Haley is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them there. I'll check in with Haley every now and then to see if we have any questions we need to hop into. I love to talk about recruiting. I love to hear your questions, so feel free. Today, we're going to be talking about scalable home care hiring, and we're going to go into some data. We're going to go into some best practices. Who in here has heard me talk about data before? Because I am obsessed with it. Feel free to say yes in the chat if you have seen me speak before and you know we are obsessed with hiring data here at Careworks. It's kind of like our whole thing, actually. Well, we're going to go ahead and dive into some today. So I want to start by talking about what I call the scalable recruiting spiral or the not scalable spiral. But first, if you don't know me, if you have not heard me before, my name is Rachel Gartner. I am the founder and CEO of Careworks. This is my beautiful family. My children have grown a ton since this picture, and it is not that long ago. Anybody else have kids like that just you buy them a whole new set of clothes? I've bought 3 entire sets of dance shoes this year for my daughter. She's gone up 4 shoe sizes in 1 year of dance. But this is me. I love my beautiful family. I am an Army wife. I am a mother of 2 young kids. I'm a home care hiring expert. And you can see I have a master's in science and biomedical science. So my background is definitely all about the data, the testing, the experiments. Really love to dig into that. And I've brought all of that to home care hiring. Love to talk about it. Love to see what's working, and always want to bring it back to great experiments. Like, let's try something. Let's watch the numbers. Let's see what happens. So that is the foundation of what we do here at Careworks. We have over 5 years of data. We function as the recruiting team for our clients. It's what we call full service recruiting. We do everything for them, getting on their job platform 7 days a week and personally calling and texting every single applicant. We have done that for over 250,000 applicants in the past 5.5 years, leading to over 15,000 hires for the agencies that we work with. We currently have a team of over 60 recruiters across the US. So I say all of that to say, if there is a challenge you're facing in recruiting, if there's a frustration that you have, we have been there. We have been in the trenches with you. I always like to point out, when you see 5+ years of data, anybody want to jump in the chat and say, why is it important that I've been here for over 5 years? Any big events in the past 5 years that might have impacted home care recruiting? Anybody? We're going to do this the whole time, by the way. I love to jump in the chat with everyone, especially first thing in the morning. COVID. Yes, just 2020 job market. COVID. Yes. The pandemic. You guys, I was already full-fledged into home care hiring before that happened. So if you have felt a little bit like the last couple of years have been crazy, up and down, we're finally seeing it kind of stabilize. We've been right there with you. Just like you, my business depends on caregiver hiring. So we've been right alongside. We've been in the trenches with you. And every single day, I have an awesome group chat from our recruiting team, over 60 recruiters across the US, who are sending funny things like, can you guys believe what this caregiver said to me? It's awesome. We are in it with you, in it to win it. And we are right here for any questions that you have. Heim said they didn't teach us how to prep for COVID when we trained years ago. That is so true. Me either, actually. Pretty much nobody trained me on anything, but certainly when you started a business, there was no awareness that that was coming. And I know you guys have been right there with us. So here's what I wanted to start talking about. Before we move into all this data and best practices, I want to see where you are, because there's two different types of spirals that I see in home care agencies today. And a lot of people think that they're all in the same place. Everybody's fighting the same battles. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. So this is the first one. I call it the downward spiral. I know that's a really creative name, but a lot of home care agencies are here, and you'll know the feeling when I describe it. A downward spiral home care agency is understaffed. And then because they're understaffed, what happens? They have to turn away some cases and hours because they can't staff them. No one wants to be in that position. And I know many of you kind of feel that in your stomach. Like, yup, you feel that knot in your gut, like that's us, that's happened. Does not feel good to turn away cases. Then what happens if you're turning away cases is you have lower revenue and lower profit, which means you can't invest it as much in your ad budget, in your recruiting pipeline, in your referral bonuses, in raises for your team, because you're downward trending in growth. So then what happens is you don't have enough hires, which leads you right back to number one. If this sounds like you might be feeling overwhelmed, you might be feeling like it's impossible, or you might be one of the agencies that is in this spiral and thinks this is where everybody is. This is just what it's like. And I hear this all the time because there's a lot of awareness that there's a staffing crisis, there's not enough people, big staffing shortage, recruiting is so hard. And what can happen is you begin to believe that everyone is in the same situation that you are because everyone talks about it. And we know over 92% of agencies are negatively impacted by staffing shortages. That's from the Home Care Pulse benchmarking report. So the vast majority of agencies are to some degree impacted by staffing shortages. But if you are in this spiral right now, I want you to know not everyone is here. There is another option that we are seeing. I call this one the scaling spiral. So in the scaling spiral, they are able to staff all cases. If you can staff every case, you have a major competitive advantage. So then what happens is you're growing hours and growing cases, which leads to higher revenue, higher profit. So then you invest more in your ad budget and recruiting pipeline, which leads to more consistent hires, and the growth continues. So the first thing that I want you to know today is that it is possible to be in this environment. Some of you are. Some of your agencies are growing and they're thriving, and this is what you know. But you also are impacted by staffing shortages. And when you talk about them, you might be talking to people who are in the other spiral and they think that they're in the same place, and you're not. It is possible to be right here. And I know this because I see this every day. We work with agencies that are meeting and exceeding their hiring goals every single month. So if you are in that first spiral we talked about and you're feeling overwhelmed or defeated, I just want you to know it is possible to succeed at caregiver recruiting and grow your business. And I know it because I see it. So here's where we see the ability to switch over. It's right here in your recruiting step. This is where you can change this spiral that you're on. You can invest time, effort, and money into your recruiting pipeline. And I want to be very clear because most of you know our company sells recruiting services, and I love them and they're amazing and they help so many agencies. But I want you to know today that that's not why I'm sharing this, because it doesn't have to be us and it doesn't have to be money. It can be time and effort. So if your agency is not in a place where you're able to invest more money in your recruiting pipeline, you can invest more effort and time in growing in the knowledge of recruiting, which is what you're doing here today. So as we go through this presentation, I'm going to share some best practices and I'm going to share some data, and I'm going to share what data you should be tracking. If you walk away with nothing else today, I want you to walk away knowing you need to start tracking your data every week. It does not take that long. It is the best thing that you can do because you're going to hear a lot of great ideas about recruiting today, and I'm so excited for that. But I want you to know if you go to a conference or you go to webinars or online events like this and you hear all these ideas about recruiting, there's probably going to be just a couple things that stick with you. And the danger is that if you're not tracking your recruiting data, you don't actually know what step in the recruiting process your agency needs to fix, because everybody needs more caregivers, but not everybody needs the same solutions. So when you're hearing all these solutions and softwares and things you can do and try this and try that, and this worked for this agency and they're hiring a ton of people, part of the defeated feeling agencies find is they try this and they try that and they spend money on this and they spend money on that, and then they still don't see the results. And it leads to burnout. And so what I want you to know about the data is the first effort you can invest to switch into this scaling spiral. Because once you have the data of your recruiting process and you know what it means, then you can winnow out all the solutions that are not for you. And you can look at it and go, that's great, but we're already above the national average at that step of the recruiting process. We're focused on something else. And you can immediately narrow down the focus that your agency needs to have. So first thing we're taking away today, it is entirely possible to meet and exceed your hiring goals, even in today's environment and in a budget-friendly way. And it is possible to grow your business. Hopefully a lot of you on here are growing your businesses. But if you're not, before you hear anything else, you need to know it is possible, because if you don't believe that, you're not going to do it because you believe everyone's understaffed. So scaling spiral, like I said, I could talk about this a long time, but let's keep moving. Here is our goal. And here's why we want to track recruiting data. We want to measure and improve every step of the hiring process so that you can hire more caregivers and grow your business. Because you guys, recruiting is a funnel and there's a lot of steps. So I keep doing this with my hands. In my mind, I'm doing the steps of the funnel, the steps of the data. When you track those and you have strategies that are specifically designed to improve that KPI, that data point, that step of your hiring funnel, and you improve it, and then you go to the next step of your funnel and you improve that, and then you improve the next step, all of a sudden you've massively changed the hiring results of your agency, not by finding some magic solution that works for everybody, but by breaking it down to the data. So you have to measure the data in order to do that. Here's the first thing you might want to take a picture of. Don't share it anywhere, but take a picture of this if you want to remember it later. And also, you will get a recording of this session. Here's the recruiting data we recommend that you track, and we do recommend that you do it weekly. The first thing is how many applicants you're getting. And I want to clarify here because I see this all the time. Agencies say, of course we're tracking applicants. We only put them in though once we find out that they are qualified or once we get them on the phone. That is not your number of applicants. Your number of applicants is every applicant, whether they're qualified or not qualified. And that's very important because one of the conversion metrics you want to look at is what percentage of your applicants are booking an interview. Well, you're not going to book someone for an interview if they're not qualified. If you're not putting applicants in unless they're qualified or they get back to you or whatever kind of qualification you're using there, you're not getting a true picture for whether or not you're attracting qualified applicants. We want this to be every applicant that you get, especially if you are paying for online job ads, because you're going to pay for every applicant. And so if you're looking at it and saying we only put them in if they're qualified, then we put them into our operating software or whatever we're using. And this is very common. What happens is you'll look at it and you'll miss a very important data point of what percentage of our applicants book an interview. Because when I come look at your data, if I see that that is low, there's two areas I dig into. One is the performance of your recruiting team and processes and your pay. The other is, are you attracting qualified applicants? And if you're not tracking every applicant you get, you don't have an accurate data point there. So number of applicants plus the cost per applicant of all of your online job ads or whatever platforms you're using. Then you're going to track the number of booked interviews. Now, we have a lot of agencies these days that are not doing interviews. They're doing them at the same time as orientation. So in that case, what we're really tracking here is the booked appointments, whether you're scheduling them for an interview or scheduling them direct to orientation. Then you want to track the successful interviews or orientations, meaning the caregiver showed up, they're qualified, and you're moving forward, they accepted the job. And then finally, the actual hire. For every one of these metrics, you want to track the percentage. Then at the bottom, when you get to the number of hires, you can work backwards to determine the cost per hire. We're going to go over unit economics in a few minutes to determine if you have a scalable cost per hire. So this is very important to understand your total all-in cost. If you are currently understaffed or struggling to staff, this is probably one of maybe two of the most important slides in this entire presentation. If you don't have these numbers, there's very little that I can do for you. And I know this because I get on calls all the time where people say, well, how much should I be spending on Indeed? And I'm like, I don't know. How much does it cost you to get a hire? What's your cost per hire target? There is no magic Indeed budget. Then people might say, well, we're not getting qualified applicants. If we don't have the data, then we can't track it. We just can't know if your recruiting process is working. The first thing I do on a strategy call with somebody is I try and get a couple months of how many applicants they're getting and how many hires. Because right away, I know, do we need to dig in more to their process or do we need to dig into the cost and if it's scalable? So kind of the benchmark in my mind, if you're curious, if you are hiring fewer than 5% of the applicants, and again, this is the total number of applicants. If that is under 5%, my red flag goes up and I start saying, let's dig into your process. What happens after they apply? What paperwork are they doing? How quick are you calling them? All of those questions. If your percentage of applicants hired is 7% or above, that tells me you're doing something right. And then I might still want to dig in to say, let's see, what is it here that's working for you? Between 5 to 7% is pretty normal. We might dig in, we might not. But that's the kind of power of data. I can't even begin to help you. And I do this all the time. This is my job, is recruiting strategy for home care. If there is not some kind of data, I can't help you. So if you are not tracking this data in your agency, you and your recruiting team are not going to be able to effectively scale your process because you're basically throwing spaghetti at the wall. Like, let's try this, let's try that. You don't really know what you're trying to accomplish and you can't measure it. And also sometimes you're going to try something new for a KPI and it might actually improve. So you might try calling people faster to increase the percentage of applicants to book an interview. That same week, if you try it for a week or two, you might have a really low show up rate. And the danger of not tracking each of these is if you just go and look and go, well, I tried this, but we didn't really get any more people showing up, because this is what a lot of agencies do, right? You say, well, we didn't have any more people sitting in orientation. The danger there is you might have found something that actually worked at one step of your recruiting process and another step that week happened to be lower. And if you're not tracking them individually, you can't pick out and go, oh, actually, this did increase the percentage that booked an interview. And if our show up rates had been what they normally are, it would have led to an improvement. That's the kind of powerful strategy that comes from this data. So I get very excited about this. Please start doing this. There's a lot of ways you can do it. If you start with a spreadsheet, that is already an improvement. Okay, let's go through an example here of why should home care agencies make database recruiting decisions? Because most of you know that they should. I know everyone on here is like, yeah, of course we want to have database strategies, but how does that actually play out? So here are 3 strategies that these home care agencies could try. Number 1, a new or better interview show up, bonus, or perk. Number 2, they're going to stop requiring the application before scheduling the interview. Everyone should do that. All of these are good strategies, by the way. Strategy number 3, they're going to stop requiring the documents to be submitted before orientation. So all of these are good. And what will happen is these agencies will talk to somebody else in the industry, or they'll go to a conference and somebody will say, I tried doing a $50 interview show up bonus, and all of a sudden we have all these hires. And they're like, wow, I should try that. And it's a good thing to try. But here's the rest of the story. Agency 1 only has 8% of their applicants booking an interview. 42% of their interviews are successful, and 9.2% of their applicants are hired. Agency 2 has 32% of their applicants booking an interview. Only 10% of their interviews are successful, but they're still getting 9.2% of applicants hired. Any of you mathematicians out there, please know I did not run the math down the line. This is an example, so just don't go double checking my math on this. Then we go further and we put those numbers in context to say right now the national average is 29% of applicants are booking an interview. So that is a target. That's like, this is what's going on right now. This gives context to the data. 32% of the interviews are successful and 9.2% of the applicants are hired. That gives us a lot more information to say, what should they be trying? Where's the difference? These two agencies are both getting a similar percentage of applicants hired. They're both hiring 5 people per month. And I'm going to tell you, these two agencies could be next door. They could be in the same town. They could be the same size. They could have completely different data. And there are so many reasons for that. So they're going to talk to each other and say, what did you try? And what did you try? They don't need the same thing. In this situation, we're going to zero in here. And I'm going to ask you guys for agency 1, what strategy do you think that they should try? 1, 2, or 3? This is for agency 1. And remember, go in the chat. I'm going to wait. Go in the chat. Agency 1, should they be doing strategy 1, 2, or 3? Katie says 1. I saw some nods. 1, I see 2, I see 1. A lot of 2s and 1s, 2s and 1s. All right, you guys can keep them coming. So for agency 1, should they be doing an interview, show up, or stop requiring applications before they schedule the interview? It's pretty split. It's pretty split. Well, I'll tell you guys my opinion. When I look at this and I see that they're only getting 8% of their applicants to schedule an interview, I am going to focus on why are people not scheduling an interview? Because if you look at their percentage of interviews that are successful and they're at 42%, that's great. They're above the national average. That's actually a really good show up rate, but they're not getting people to book the interview in the first place. So in this case, what I would do is number 2, I would stop requiring the application before scheduling the interview. And again, all of these are good things, but for most agencies, they're only going to try 1, maybe 2 things at a time, especially if we're talking about spending more money, like doing an interview show up. For agency number 1, if they do a new interview show up, when we look at their comparison to the national average, they're probably not going to have much of an impact from that. They might have some. They might be able to go from 42% to 45 or 50%. Beyond that, they're not going to have much more of a high interview show up rate. But when you look at their percentage of applicants to book an interview, that's their biggest window of opportunity. When we're looking for a big opportunity, what strategy is going to make the biggest change for this agency? We look at what metric they are furthest from the national average in. And in this case, that's the percentage of applicants that book an interview. Because if they got that up to the national average, they could triple the hires that they get by tripling the first step conversion rate. So with that in mind, I would do strategy 2 for them. And for agency 2, I would do the new interview show up rate or show up perk for the same reason. When you look at agency 2, they are already getting above the national average for applicants to book an interview, but their interviews that are successful, the show up, the qualified people that actually attend the interview is 10%. So again, for the window of opportunity, what we're looking for here is where there is the biggest gap between the agency's current data and the national average. And that's where we want to focus. So I go over all this because when I tell you guys, start tracking this data, this is why, because you do not have a set it and forget it recruiting strategy. That's the truth of the home care industry. Recruiting is very difficult. It is very hard, and it is going to take ongoing efforts to have a great strategy that scales with you. So when you track this data and you have the context of something like a national average, you can come in and say, we're suddenly not meeting our hiring goals, or we're not growing the way we want to. Where do we need to focus? Where is that window of opportunity that we need to focus on strategies for this step, not all the other ideas out there in the industry? This step is what we need to focus on. It also is very helpful to track this to have a baseline so that if something changes, like for all of a sudden you're slowing down, You don't panic. You come into it with the data and go, wow, our percentage of applicants that book an interview has dropped the last 2 months. What's changed? Is it who's doing it? Is it how much they have on their plate? Are we hitting a bottleneck? There are so many things that could be, but now you know exactly where to zero in. Okay, that was basically already doing math, but who's ready to do some math? I know that's what everybody loves to do on a Thursday morning. Do I have any math people in here that are like, yeah? I will tell you why you should be excited right now, because what we're about to talk about is the scalable unit. Oh, I already skipped ahead. Look, I did it. Boom, boom. Where am I going? I'm going the wrong way. Pretend you didn't see that, everybody. We're going to do math and talk about two very important questions. One is how many applicants that you need, because I get this all the time. People are like, we're just not getting anybody. And you go look, and they're not getting nearly enough applicants for their current recruiting needs. We get this with our own clients, people who are like, why are you not getting results? And we're telling them, you need more applicants. We need to redo your ads. We need to post them in a different place. We need to sponsor a budget. And then we get the question of, well, how much should I be spending on Indeed? I can answer that for you with math. The second thing we're going to go through, I'm so excited for, unit economics, of how to know if your unit economics are scalable in a cost-effective way. The big question. I know you were all hoping I was going to come on here today and tell you to just spend a ton more money and you'll get everything that you need. But actually, we're going to talk through the unit economics to see how much can you spend and is it a scalable process? Okay, first question. How many applicants do you need? This is different for every agency. So this is so simple. It is the number of applicants divided by the number of hires times how many hires you want to get. Is that simple? That's pretty easy math, right? I saw some nods, I saw them. This is very simple math, but most agencies don't do it. And then they're like, why are we not meeting our goals? Maybe you're not getting enough applicants. This number will fluctuate, so it's good to look at this at least once a month. I generally recommend that for that conversion metrics and data, you track it every week. And then for your ad budgets, your applicant flow, your overall goals, move to once a month to sit down and review all of it. So for the number of applicants, you're just going to work backwards. It takes us this many applicants to get a hire. We want this many hires. In this example, this agency needs 167 applicants. The amazing thing here is that then you can go to your job ad budgets if you're sponsoring ads and see what are we spending per applicant, and you can just multiply your cost per applicant by the number of applicants that you need and go into the month knowing how much you need to spend to be on target to meet your hiring goals. This kind of information is so powerful, but you have to look at it every month. One of the pitfalls I see people fall into is they get this math, it looks good, and they go, well, let's just double our Indeed budget and get twice as many hires. You have to look at this frequently, because as you grow, you will hit bottlenecks. So for example, something that we see a lot is if you have one recruiter and you decide to double your recruiting and you decide you want more people and you go out and you spend a bunch of money on Indeed, you might look at it 2 or 3 months later and go, well, we spent all this money on Indeed and it didn't make a difference. It's possible that that's just true because Indeed likes to eat money, but it's also possible that your recruiter hit a bottleneck, because if you have one recruiter and you double the number of applicants, what will happen is your recruiter can no longer provide the same applicant experience, meaning they're contacting them as quickly, they're giving them as much individualized attention because now they have twice as many people. So your conversion of applicants to hires will actually come down. As you are scaling your recruiting, you have to keep an eye on that to see where are we hitting a bottleneck that you might still be growing, you might still be getting more hires, but your conversion of applicants to hires might go down, which means your cost per hire goes up and you need more applicants. That is a dangerous place to be. So as you go about scaling your agency, keep an eye on these numbers at least once a month to see if it's taking you more and more applicants, because your conversion of applicants to hires is actually coming down. The sign might be that you actually don't have a big enough recruiting team for the number of applicants, which if you want to talk about a scalable recruiting team leader, you know where to find me. We're very good at that. All right, next piece of math we're going to do. This is a big one for agency managers, owners, leaders. Are your unit economics scalable? Every business has basic unit economics to know if your business is on track to scale in a good, cost-effective way. This is what we look at for the unit economics of caregiver hiring. And it just comes down to math. You can have all the emotions in the world about this and about people not showing up and about how hard it is, but it just comes down to math. So in this case, what we want to look at for your unit economics of caregiver hiring are the average hours a hire works. And I don't mean per week, I mean the lifetime that they are with your agency. So this is a function of how well you're scheduling them and how many hours they're working, along with how long they are retained at your agency. So that's the average hours a hire works. If you do not know, you have to go pull how many hours per average is a caregiver working each week, or your caregivers as a whole working each week, and how long on average are your employees staying with your agency, and then you can figure out your average hours. You're going to multiply that by the hourly rate that you charge, meaning the rate that you charge your client, not the rate that you pay your caregiver. And then you're going to multiply that by the percentage of the budget that's allocated to hiring, which is where I lose a lot of people that go, I don't really know. I want to caution you right there, because I hear it all the time. People are like, we want as many hires as we can get, which is awesome if your unit economics are scalable, if you have a good cost per hire, and if you know what it is. So what we're going to look at here is the percentage of budget allocated to hiring specifically. Generally, what you want to look at here is a combination of online ads and your team, any bonuses that you're doing for caregivers, any training that you're paying for caregivers. You can put that all in here if you're combining that all into your budget for recruiting and onboarding. If you separate them out, you can say we want to spend this amount on advertising our jobs, and that is separate from our staff cost. So however you do it, just be consistent between your budget and what you're including and what you're spending. So in the example here, let's say they want to spend 2% of their revenue on hiring. Their average caregiver works 1,200 hours and they charge $42 an hour. In this case, a scalable cost per hire would be $1,008. I know many agencies that will balk at that number and go, absolutely not. Our cost per hire is $1,000. That's crazy. It is crazy for most agencies if you have a high turnover and you're not scheduling them for enough hours. So for especially new agencies, this would be way too high for you. You're going to have a much lower cost per hire initially. But this is a scalable cost per hire for this agency in this example. So then what you can do is say, we want this amount of hires. Do we have the cash to do that? So when people start saying, we want to hire 30 people a month, we're currently hiring 5. You're probably going to have to ramp up to that slowly by growing your business enough to grow the cash flow to support the cost per hire. Many agencies are spending less than this, which is wonderful. I do see Catherine asked what should be included in the recruiting budget. It depends on how you structure your overall business budget. If you are looking at the total percentage that you want to spend on hiring and onboarding, including the cost of your staff, you have to build all of that into what you're allocating there to say our cost per hire target is $1,000. X amount of this goes to job ads, X amount of this goes to the staff, X amount of this goes to bonuses, X amount goes to training, and break it down that way. So it might be we want to spend $250 a month on our online ads. We know based on how much we're paying our staff and how many hires we get, it's costing us $500 per hire just to pay the staff that does it. And then you might also be spending money on training and onboarding and software. So that is how I would do it. If I were running a home care agency, I would look at the total percentage for hiring and onboarding and then break that cost per hire target down to say, out of this $1,000, what is it costing me to have the staff? What is it costing me in online job ads? And break it down that way. If your unit economics are scalable, you can start to dump more money in your job ads and trust that it's going to work. But like I said, you have to keep an eye on it, because if your recruiting team is not scalable, these numbers will change drastically when you start to increase that flow, because the quality of the applicant experience will come down because you will overwhelm your recruiter. So if you're going to do this, the money is important. If your unit economics are scalable, you can grow your agency exponentially, but you have to have a scalable team that can do that with you. Okay, this is a new concept, the scalable recruiting triangle. This took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to narrow down to a concept that's on a single slide. So please do not take this and reshare it anywhere, because this was actually like a ton of work to put together. But I'm going to start by bringing up a meme that some of you may have seen. This was very popular when I was in college, and it was a triangle, and it said, good grades, social life, enough sleep, you can only pick two. Has anybody else seen that? If you have, go in the chat and just say meme. I might be speaking primarily to my generation. This is a really niche meme. Catherine has seen it. There you go. At least one person. Yes. 2 people. So excited. All right. So a lot of you guys have seen that meme. It's like you can only pick 2 of these things. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. You can only not have one of these things. Like you have to have these things to scale. So I get these questions all the time of what are people doing who are growing? Because I started by telling you some agencies are meeting and exceeding their hiring goals, and they're growing really quickly. And we work with a lot of agencies that are doing that. We work with one agency that set a 2024, so this year, their recruiting goal for this year. They started working with us in the middle of 2023 and hit that goal by the end of last year, an entire year early. And then they set a new crazy goal of the hires, the active caregivers on the roster that they wanted to have by July, and they hit it in April. I mean, who here wants to be in that club, right? That's so exciting. Their agency is growing by leaps and bounds. And that is one of many agencies we work with that I could tell very similar stories. So what are those what are those agencies doing in recruiting that's making that happen? Here's what I have found. The most scalable agencies have all 3 of these things. They have lower than average requirements. And before anyone panics, I am not saying the common phrase, hire anyone with a pulse. I don't want to hire anyone with a pulse. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about agencies that have robust training and support for their caregivers. So if they get somebody in the door that is a great person, very personable, respectful, great communicator, and they want to hire that person, they don't have to have super high requirements because they know they can train that person and support them into becoming an amazing caregiver. So when we talk about lower than average requirements, just know that goes hand in hand with robust training and support for new hires. In addition to having lower than average requirements, they have a streamlined hiring process. It is fast, it is efficient, it is easy for the caregiver. They also have at least average, but typically above average pay. If you have all 3 of those things, you have a highly scalable recruiting process. If you have 2 of those things, you probably still have a scalable recruiting process. Agencies that only have 1 of these things will have an uphill battle. And I hear this typically is like, I don't know why we're not getting people. We pay $2 an hour better than anybody else in town, which is great, but it's still only 1 of the 3 things. If you don't have any of these 3 things, you are probably going to be chronically understaffed. And again, like we talked about at the beginning, this is where the danger is, where people are chronically understaffed and they're saying there's a huge recruiting shortage, like there's not enough people. And they talk to somebody else who goes, yeah, you're right, we're in it too. But the person they're talking to might actually be meeting their hiring goals every month. It's just really hard. And they've worked very hard at these 3 things. So you have agencies out there that'll be talking to you like, yeah, it's hard for us too, man. It's hard for everybody. And you think, oh, we're all in the same boat. But the person you're talking to might have worked really, really hard to become one of these agencies. So yeah, it was really hard. And it was like, they feel the staffing shortage. It was very difficult, but they made it to the scalable place and they are growing. So if you are chronically understaffed, be so mindful when you talk to everybody that you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And just because everyone is saying that there's a staffing shortage does not mean that everyone is understaffed. There are a lot of people that are not understaffed and are growing. These are the things that they have in common, these 3 things. I want to also point out, because people get these 2 things conflated all the time. We have a lot of people that have what I would call a very tedious hiring process, not streamlined, tedious hiring process. And they think that what they have is really high standards for who they hire. And typically what this sounds like is if they can't even get the paperwork done, they wouldn't have been a good hire anyways. And they're conflating the hiring process with the hiring requirements. And I want to be very clear that those are 2 completely different things. Having a tedious process with a lot of paperwork or extra steps, or we have to get all this done before they even come into the office, otherwise it's a waste of time. It can feel like what you're doing is having really high standards to only hire the best people. But actually, what you're doing is weeding out people who are very busy. And this is where it comes back to something we talk about all the time, which is the caregiver first mindset. Here at Carework, we think very highly of the caregivers and we want to put their needs first. Because remember, in home care recruiting, it's the caregiver's job to get a job. It's your job to make that at your agency. So if you're thinking they're the ones that need a job, yes, but you're the one that needs to staff your agency. So if you have a tedious hiring process, you are probably just weeding out a lot of people who are very busy or already got a job somewhere else. Having a streamlined hiring process does not mean that you are hiring anyone with a pulse. It means you are getting as many people in your door as you can so that you can find the high quality caregivers because you don't have a crystal ball. Christine asked, what if the state requirements are causing the tedious hiring process? We see this all the time. Christine, what state are you in? If I can ask, because I have a couple guesses off the top of my head. There's a couple that come to mind that have really intense state requirements. New York. I am not surprised. Not surprised. Yes, there are some high regulation states that make it very difficult. What I will say is that if that is out of your control, you have to be so deliberate about every piece that is in your control. Most agencies, when you look at their metrics, they're going to have steps that they're below the national average, and you want to improve those. But when you hit a ceiling, you have to focus on the steps that you do have control. So in this case, if your state has really tedious requirements, every other part of your recruiting process has to be top of the line. Your pay now longer does not only have to be in comparison to other home care agencies who have the same requirements. It has to be good in comparison to unregulated industries, to retail, to things that people can go do instantly. You have to build a great culture. You have to build great training. You have to have your recruiting process absolutely clear of great processes, very connected to the caregiver, very engaging, making it easy for them, getting them in the door, making them feel heard, making them feel special. So in general, if you have a state that you have to go through a tedious hiring process, it is all the more important that you are absolutely nailing it at every other step that you do have control over. Also, look back at this triangle. If you absolutely cannot have a super streamlined process, like you've done everything that you can, look at the other two parts and say, how can we do better in these areas? And do your best in the areas that you do have control. But yes, if you have a tedious state process, you need an amazing applicant experience. So that is what I call the scalable recruiting triangle. I would challenge you guys to really look at it and be honest with yourself of how many of these things you have and where you might improve. Let's sum it up a little bit here. Cost-effective, scalable growth. And I am, by the way, going to leave some time for questions at the end. So please feel free to continue putting them in the chat. There are a few things that go into cost-effective, scalable growth for home care agencies. Number one, understanding your unit economics. Typically, for most businesses in general, the crux of scalability is the cost and the cash flow to support the growth that you want to see. And recruiting is absolutely in that category. If you want to scale your recruiting, you will have to spend more money. It's not just money, like we talked about. It's time, it's effort, it's knowledge, it's training. But as you grow, you're going to have to spend more money. You're probably going to have to spend more on job ads. You're going to have to spend more on your team to support that growth. So you need to understand your unit economics to know if your growth is sound, if it's sustainable. And this is what we want to look at: your retention, hours worked, and margins, and then work backwards to set your recruiting budget and your cost per hire goal. If your current cost per hire is in that range, I would say you are ready to scale. You have a good process. It's working for you. It's in your target. But like I said, keep an eye on that, because as you grow, if you hit bottlenecks, particularly around your team or around applicant flow, those numbers will change. So you want to look at those at least once a month to make sure it's still in the target cost per hire area. The next thing you need to do is set your agency growth goals. So now you know what it's going to cost. How many caregivers do you need to hire every month? This is going to be based on the growth goals of your agency and your average hours worked per hire. And then, of course, also account for turnover. And I know so many people on here are like, as many as we can, which is amazing. But that's not a workable plan. Your plan has to be more specific. How many can we afford to hire? How many do we have work for? How many do we have enough team to get them onboarded without compromising the experience? So if you're ready to grow quickly, you need to think through those things. Do we have enough staff in the office to support them? If we're going to meet this growth goal of as many caregivers as we want, do we have a marketing and sales process that will support enough work for all of those clients? Do we have enough schedulers? And you have to put all of this together in one place, which I know hopefully many of you do. But when you bring it back to recruiting, I do hear that all the time. We just want as many hires as we can. Well, what is it going to cost to get those hires? Do you know what your cost per hire is? And are you prepared to support that? And then the last thing is to use your metrics as levers. If you have a reasonable cost per applicant and conversion to hires, you can increase your ad budget and meet your hiring goals. Just keep an eye on your metrics. They will change. They will change all the time. And if you've used online job ads, you know the cost will change all the time. What's working will change all the time. The algorithm will change all the time. And there are so many ways to work that system, but you really don't know what you need if you're not tracking the data. Okay. Anybody here not tracking your data and thinking you're going to start next week? If that's you, say next week in the chat. That's the step you're going to take today to kind of hold yourself accountable to say, I need to be tracking these numbers. I'm going to start next week. Next week. Yes. Love. Heim said they are, but clearly not enough. Carlos said next week. Carlos, great news. You work with Carework. We track almost all of this for you already. So it's there. Or today. Yes, go look at it today. This week. Yes, it is awesome, Carlos. We love tracking that data. How many of you guys are tracking the data? And this might be if you're sitting here thinking, well, I track all those numbers, but like they're not doing anything for us. If you have data and you don't know what it means or you don't know what to do with it, hop in the chat and just say, we're trying. We're trying. We're tracking the data. We're trying. Alicia said need to do better at our tracking. I totally understand that. Yes, we are trying. It's hard work. It is really hard work. I'll tell you guys, we've been doing this for 6 years and we still learn new things all the time. We build a lot of tools for that because it is very hard. Cheryl said we've been doing it since 2022. I love that, Cheryl, because Cheryl did training with me a couple years ago and uses the Careworks software to track it all. So Cheryl's got her data locked down. Tracking, but need to work on the steps to improve. Tracking and trying, that's totally normal. Guys, I have a lot of training around all of these data points because it is hard. Catherine said, we need an automatic ATS. We are trying, but only first-time applicants that we screen because it's all manual entry. It is hard. I totally get that. It is hard, but really, if you break it down, I mean, Carework handles like 10,000 or more applicants every month. It can be done. It's just a daily thing. There has to be time allotted for it. Patty said, thanks to Careworks, we're doing even better than before. Patty, you guys are doing an amazing job. And for those of you who are on the leadership track today at the summit, you will hear from Patty later today in our panel. So here is the summary of great recruiting data. It is accurate. This is the #1 issue we see when agencies start trying to build a database strategy is they go start digging in. Typically somebody that is an owner, a manager, a leader, they go to start digging into their data. And as they do so, they go, well, that doesn't seem right. Well, why does it say we had more hires than applicants? Why are our applicants not in there? Accurate. You need accurate recruiting data. You also need data that is up to date. If it is a year old, it may not be at all applicable to your current market because the truth is these numbers fluctuate all the time, particularly with the volatile employment market that we are in right now. These are different every single month. So you need to have up-to-date data both for your agency and for national context. That's the next step is you need data that is in context. So once you have your data, what does it mean? What's good? What's scalable? You know, we looked earlier at that example. to say, well, this agency is only getting 8% of their applicants to book an interview when they need, the national average is 29%. There's their great window of opportunity. So for your recruiting data to truly be useful, it has to be in context. And then the last step here is it needs to be paired with education and accountability. So we talked in here in the chat, a lot of you guys are trying to track your data, but you're not quite sure what to do with it. What does it mean? What's the strategy? You need education around it that is specific to say, how do you get better at applicants booking an interview? How do you get better at them showing up? How do you get better at retention? How do you lower your cost on job ads? You also need accountability within your agency to say, as a recruiter, you own these metrics. As a leader of an agency, you own these metrics. And I don't mean to imply that your recruiter is not a leader, but typically a frontline recruiter doesn't have control over how much you pay or what kind of reputation your agency has or what training you offer. And all of those things impact your recruiting KPIs. So make sure you understand what metrics does your recruiter actually impact and what metrics are really on the overall agency. And that's when you can begin to provide very powerful accountability. So here's an example of what that can look like. This is on the Careworks software, somebody's applicants per week. Here's what we have. It's in context because the red line is a national average. You can look at this line and go, wow, this agency is growing. And yes, they are. So this is their total number of applicants every week. We can see it compared to the national average of home care agencies across the US are typically getting closer to 30 to 40 applicants per week. This agency is getting hundreds of applicants every single week. So they know on applicant flow, they are good. It is also up to date. You can see over there on the right that it is going all the way up through current. It is paired with education. We have this awesome button that says, help me get better at this, where they can say, if I'm below the national average on this metric, what do I do with that? What does that mean? And that's what we want to do. And then also, this is pointing right here. It could be pointing anywhere, but it is accurate. This data is accurate, live, up to date. This is the kind of data we want you guys to have all of the time. So obviously in this example, this is on the Careworks software, so they have a live national average. If you are not working with Carework, you can still have your numbers be live, up to date. If you go out and search, you can find education. It's maybe a little bit harder to know what KPI it's for, but you can find education. And that's what we want you to do for your team, or if you are a recruiter. Look at these numbers, understand what they mean, understand what the target is, and have education that supports it. So if you are looking for something like that, I will tell you, and this is very exciting for me, but we are about to launch a version of the Careworks software that has a live data dashboard for everyone. We currently have our applicant tracking system that automatically tracks all of your recruiting metrics and the live national average. That's what I just showed you a picture of, where they have, whoop, I went the wrong way again. This is an example of our ATS. They have all of their data. They have the national data. It's all right there. But what we're about to launch is, if you are not using our applicant tracking system and you just want to know the national context and you want this beautiful, help me get better at this button, we're about to launch that. So if you would like more information, you can scan this QR code to get on the wait list to be one of the first people. It is live data. It's up to date all the time. It's only for home care agencies. And like I said, we process tens of thousands of applicants. So there's an incredible data set there, so that when your agency is tracking this data, you can look every week and go, but what does it mean? What does this data mean? I'm going to need at least one person for my own anxiety to scan that QR code and tell me that it's working. Anybody want to scan that and then pop in the chat and say yes? Because I want to know right now if it's not. Yes, Catherine said, any suggestions on a data-oriented ATS? Yes, Careworks software is built to track all of this data for you. Thank you guys for confirming the QR code is working. We are very excited for that. And I just want to reiterate, there are a lot of ways that Carework can help you hire more caregivers. It can be this national data with all this amazing education for your team. It can be our team doing it for you, which is full service recruiting. But at the end of the day, every agency is going to find different things that work for them. My goal is that you walk away from today with knowledge that helps you help your business grow. Because at the end of the day, if you can hire more caregivers, you can provide more access to care in your community. And that is the heart of Carework. That's what we do. I have an incredible team. If you guys don't know this, we hire almost exclusively military spouses, and I have an entire team, that 60 plus number, incredibly qualified people who have such a heart for this. And they still get discouraged sometimes. This is all that we do. And they still sometimes are like, I'm so frustrated. We've tried all of these things. And we are national experts. So I know a lot of you guys today are feeling that way or have felt that way, discouraged, burnout. We tried everything. We've spent so much money. We've done this, we've done that. I want you to know it's possible to succeed. And please don't lose sight of why it matters, because yes, it will grow your business, but it will also provide more access to care in your community. I was just talking to a member of my team last week about what that mission means to her and what it was like for her family when they had trouble finding a caregiver for in-home care when they needed it. I have had people in my family and friend network call me and say, we have called everybody in our town. Do you know any agencies that could help us? Because they couldn't get the access to care. So with all of this scalable talk and the cost and the budget and the numbers, don't lose sight of your mission, because what you are doing matters. It matters for your team, it matters for you, but it also matters for your community, because home care makes such an incredible difference. I will end it there. I am open for questions, so we can do that right now in the chat. If you have a question, start dropping them in the chat. I am so excited for the rest of today. This is the biggest event Carework has ever done, the Recruiting and Retention Summit. So here's what is up next. Stephen Tweed and Jensen Jones are going to be talking about how strong leadership drives recruitment and retention success on our leadership track. On our recruiter track that is specific for frontline home care recruiters, we have Nick talking about recruiting and retaining talent through marketing. Every single speaker we have today is amazing. We have panels later today with agencies that are scaling, so you can hear from owners of agencies that are growing very quickly. What's working? What are they doing? What's different? We also have a panel of recruiters from Carework talking about just a day in the life of a home care recruiter. What are they doing? What's working? How are they avoiding burnout as well? Because like I said, we're in it with you. Any questions in the chat? Did I answer all of them on the first go? Told you guys I could talk all day, but I tried not to. Anybody? All right. Well, you guys take a break, go to the bathroom, get a snack. I'm going to order a sub, to be honest. Matt, thank you so much. I will definitely pass that on.